Hey Hank, this is Kevin G. Summers. Just wanted to stop by and congratulate you on hitting episode 200 of the awesome Author Stories podcast. I can't tell you how many times that I've been going around in the morning, doing my chores, milking cows, feeding pigs, maybe butchering some chickens or something like that, and listening to your show and some of the great authors that you've had on board, like Craig Johnson and Margaret Weis. And, I was in episode 23, so that's obviously the best show that you did. But all the other ones, the 199 others, are great shows, and I love your show, man. Congratulations. You're the best.
And if you know who I am, don't you breathe it to nobody, 'cause you know I'm on the lam. Wanted Man by Lucy Watson.
Well, thanks, Kevin. Yes, sirree, we made it to episode 200. Thank you for tuning in each week. As you know, you can find all of the archives, all 200 of them, at hankgarner.com. And there are handy links there in the sidebar where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher Radio and YouTube. And anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can always just go to hankgarner.com and listen. Thanks to everyone who has supported the show these 200 episodes. I've got a few sponsors that I would like to thank. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, episode 17 is out. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned is a dark science fiction horror and slipstream magazine that they've been working on since 2015. What is dark science fiction and horror, you might ask? Well, think of it as literary Twilight Zone, Night Gallery, or Outer Limits. It's Netflix's Black Mirror in the short story format. And it's a bargain. Each monthly issue has 3 to 5 sharp, suspenseful, satirical tales from today's top speculative fiction writers. Pick it up at Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. There's a link in the show notes. Also, Dominion Rising, with 23 all-original science fiction and epic fantasy novels. Dominion Rising is the box set of the year. It's going to be releasing soon. Make sure you get your pre-order in. This collection features nearly 8,000 pages and over 1 million words in total, bringing you sharp, suspenseful, and thought-provoking novels of dark forces and light, of magic and adventure, of enchanted swords and galactic empires. Dominion Rising, pre-order it now for only 99 cents. There's a link in the show notes. Also, my good pal Nick Breaker and Paul E. Hicks have released the second book in their Galactic Satori Chronicles series. The second book is called Kron. The first one is called Earth, and I'm friends with Nick on Facebook, and he has been attending a bunch of cons, and I love seeing the pictures that he posts where he's meeting new fans, putting books in their hands, and none of them are coming back and complaining. That's because Galactic Satori Chronicles is one of the best science fiction series I've read in quite some time. Go pick it up. There's a link in the show notes. I'd also like to thank my good friend Ed Gosney for sponsoring the show. Ed's blog, Cool Comics and My Collection, is a weekly trip down memory lane that is more than just nostalgia. I guarantee you'll learn something that you didn't know before. I always do. Ed's latest post talks about the new Heroes and Villains anthologies that we're both a part of. We each have stories in there in the Villains book. We are got a little friendly rivalry with the Heroes, and they're both great. Pick up both the Heroes and the Villains. There's a link to it in the show notes. Each of them are just 99 cents during the launch window. And we're going to have a special live YouTube show next weekend. And my good friend Ed is going to join me along with Steve Bollier. And I think we've got another author or two, Christopher Vallon. I think we're trying to get. Don't tell Chris I outed him if he hasn't made up his mind yet. Also, Amy Hale's series, The Shadows Trilogy, is an awesome blend of supernatural adventure with a touch of romance. Guaranteed exciting beach reads from the talented Amy Hale. Pick them up on all ebook platforms and in paperback. Also, I'd like to thank Crystal Pico Watanabe. Her website is picoshouse.com. That's PIKKOSHOUSE.com. Crystal offers a wide range of services, including developmental editing, beta reading, line editing, and proofreading. She also has a secret menu of services for clients. If you mention that you heard about Pico's House on Author Stories, she'll offer a small discount to you. So please go see Crystal, one of the very best editors in the business, and let her know that you heard about it on Author Stories. I'd like to thank everyone that has sponsored the show over these past 200 episodes and has kept the Author Stories spirit alive. Rob McClelland, I'd like to thank you personally, and ThirdScribe.com for supporting the show for many months and for maintaining the Author Stories discussion group on ThirdScribe. You have been a great help to the show, a great friend of the show, and I'd like to thank you. My good friends Chris Porteau, Stefan Boltz, and Daniel Smith for your friendship and for your support. Not only do you support the show with your words, but also with your deeds, and I just want to thank those guys especially, and all of the folks that have freely given of their time, energy, talent, wisdom to make the show what it is. Another one of those friends is Richard Glebes. I'd like to thank him for his ardent support of the show. We will continue our Halloween tradition this year and record a special show all about spooky tales. As always, we have an audio clip from Richard's Jason Crane series at the end of the show. You'll want to be sure to stick around for that. Before my interview with Margaret Weiss begins, I have a few more words from some well-wishers. Thank you to everyone who's made this show very special, and thanks to all of you for listening.
Hi, Hank. This is Daniel Arthur Smith. Congratulations on your 200th episode. I've listened to every one, and I was thinking, 200 episodes at an hour apiece. That's 6 weeks of listening to experienced professionals for 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday. That's a master's program. Thanks for contributing to the community and the craft in such a strong way. And cheers to 200 more.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's Josh Hayes.
And Scott Moon.
And we are Keystroke Medium and huge fans of Hank Garner's The Author Stories podcast. A couple of my favorite episodes over the last 200 have been definitely Brandon Sanderson, Patrick Roth. This was a really good one. Oh, and Diane Gabaldon was a really, really fun interview. I learned a lot from that one. Really excited to see the guest that he's got coming up. Love his show, love his ability to really dive down into what makes writers writers.
Yeah, the great thing about his show is he takes a guest into places I wouldn't expect, and every time I listen, I learn something, and it's just good entertainment, great podcast, and can't wait for a couple hundred more episodes.
That's right. Hank, congratulations on your 200th episode. We are looking forward to the next 200 episodes, and we'll have to get you back on live because the last time we had a really good time.
All right, and so for all the Hank's fans, if you want to get the real dirt on Hank, come over to Keystroke Medium. You can hear our interview with him over there and just get into places you really can't ever get out of your head again.
That's right. Oh, man, that's right. Well, thanks, Hank, for letting us come on your show and come on our show, and we're looking forward to what the next couple of years brings for us.
Hank, this is Will Swordstrom. Congratulations on 200 episodes of the Author Stories podcast. Not only has it been a privilege to be on your show, but getting to hear authors from across the spectrum encourages me whenever I tune in. Most importantly, I'm proud to call you my friend. Congrats, and let's see what the next 200 bring.
Hey, this is Armand Rosamilia of Armcast, Dead Sexy Podcast. Also co-host of the Mondo Method podcast with Chuck Buda on Project Entertainment Network. And I just want to say that Hank Garner is probably one of the coolest guys out there. And I'm not even just saying that because he paid me a lot of money. The Author Stories podcast with Hank is pretty damn cool. It is amazing the level of guests he can get on his show every week. 200 episodes is quite a feat. I know a lot of podcasts drop after 6 months of doing it. If you get to 50 episodes on podcast, it's awesome. The fact that he's done 200, and he's done 200 brilliant episodes, and I'm not just saying that because he paid me a lot of money. Hank is, again, probably one of the coolest guys, and it's on my bucket list for Hank and I to meet, hang out in person, and for him to buy me a beer and probably something to eat. All right, Hank, here's to another 200.
Hank, this is Stefan Boltz. Makes me so happy that you're doing this. 200 episodes is incredible. The amount of authors you have on the show is, the caliber is just stunning. I learn from every episode. Keep up the good work, my friend. Talk soon.
Thanks again to everyone who sent in some well wishes, and I thought I would play some of the highlights for you before we started this excellent interview. Today, my guest is Margaret Weiss, a legend in publishing and tabletop gaming. We had a fantastic chat. I think you're going to love it. Be sure to tune in next week where Terry Brooks will be our guest, and we've got Tad Williams scheduled for the week after that, I think. So thanks for listening. 200 episodes in the can. Here's to 200 more. Now on to my interview with Margaret Weiss. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have a legend in fantasy literature and in gaming. If you are a kid of the 70s, 80s, 90s, you know the name Margaret Weiss and her contributions to not only tabletop gaming and RPGs, but the Dragonlance series and so many other things. Welcome to episode 200, Margaret.
Thank you so much, and thanks for asking me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Well, I was a storyteller long before I ever thought of being a writer.
As most of us were.
Yeah. My kindergarten teacher used to put me in front of the class during nap time, and I would tell stories while the kids were on their little blankets, and she did her paperwork.
Oh, nice. What sort of stories did you were the kind of things that grabbed your imagination?
Well, I don't really remember. I know I kind of vaguely remember sitting up in front of the class, but my mother tells me that at one point I told the kids Treasure Island because I had been watching it on Walt Disney, and but I hadn't seen the last episode, so I just made up my own ending. So
was that those when Disney did the Sunday night?
Right.
Yes, yes.
So I'm trying to remove.
But you hadn't seen the end of it?
I'm trying to remove the shelving. He's being a pain. So come here, Clancy. So no, but I hadn't seen the end, so I made up my own. So I have no idea what that was like.
Nice, nice. Were you a big reader as a kid?
Oh yes, yeah. My parents were both readers, and we didn't. You know, this was back in the 50s. We didn't go to the movies or, you know, do that much. But every week we went to the library. And, you know, I think one of the proudest moments of my life was when I got my library card.
I remember getting my first library card, too, and it was like a rite of passage.
It is. It really is.
I guess it's kind of like for kids today when they get their first device where they can get to Google, maybe.
I suppose. I don't know. I just remember that. It was a little paper library card, and I remember I was just so proud of it, especially because I got to take out my own books instead of having to share with my mother.
Right, right. Oh, I don't know about you, but our library, let's see, in the kids section, I think we got to check out like 6 things at a time.
Yes.
But when you got your upgraded you know, adult card or whatever, you got to check out like 20 at a time or something.
I
This
know.
crazy
It
number.
Was,
yeah,
that was so cool. Plus the fact you got to go into the adult section because I wasn't allowed to go in there. You know, I had to stay in the kid. I mean, they actually monitored, you know, your age, which was weird.
That is weird.
Although I do remember once, I think I was in the 2nd grade, and I found a book. I wandered into the adult section, and I found a book called The Doll's House. And I really wanted to have my mother check it out for me, but she had to tell me it wasn't the kind of doll's house I was thinking of. It was Ibsen's The Doll's House.
Oh, Did that scar you for life?
Well, she wouldn't let me read it, and I probably wouldn't have understood it. But
oh, that's great. You are known for writing fantasy books and kind of adventure books, and with these fantastical settings. But where were you raised? I'm always really intrigued by kind of how the places where we're from and the things that inform our growing up years tend to or tend not to affect the kind of things we wind up writing.
Well, I was born and raised in Independence, Missouri, and
a very fantastical place.
Yes, right. So I depended a lot on my own imagination.
As I can imagine, growing up in rural Mississippi, you lean on your imagination a whole lot because there's just not a lot of other outside information coming in. You graduated from college with a BA in literature and creative writing. Mm-hmm. Was this something that you always knew that you wanted to do?
Well, no. When I went, I was a storyteller, and when my friends and I in the neighborhood got together to play, I would devise the stories that we kind of would act out and roam up and around the neighborhood in these stories. And I liked to write, and I remember I did a book report on Sherlock Holmes when I was in the 9th grade, which I loved Sherlock Holmes. And so it was like a 13-page book report when everybody else was doing a paragraph. And my teacher flunked me on it because she said I plagiarized it. But, you know, what I really wanted to be then was an artist. And when I went to college, I was planning to major in art. But my freshman English teacher kept me after class one day, scared me to death, and told me that she thought I had a real gift for writing, and I ever thought about majoring in writing. And I always define that moment, and I still remember it as like in the Blues Brothers when the sky opens up and the sun shines down on John Belushi. And he goes, you know, he knows he has to put the band back together. That was my moment when I realized, yes, I was meant to be a writer, not an artist.
Oh, my God,
and
that's
I
amazing.
Switched my major.
You switched your major there. Wow. Did you have any inkling that you would wind up writing the kinds of things that you have?
I read Lord of the Rings in the 60s when it first came out, and, it was sweeping across the college campuses, and that's where I read it when I was in college. I kind of looked for other fantasy books at the time, but there weren't that many, especially like Tolkien. So I went into, at that time, I would write anything. And I started doing, I had an agent, and I started doing juvenile nonfiction just to pay, make some extra money. So I did that. And then writing novels on the side, I'd always kind of lean toward the fantastical, just because it gives you so much scope for the imagination, as Anne of Green Gables would say. And so I did that. I wrote The Star of the Guardians, which is kind of galactic fantasy, sent it to my agent, who sent it off, and it got rejected. Most of my novels got rejected, which is pretty typical.
Right.
They were bad. But Susan Allison, who was editor at Ace at the time, I think she's vice president or something now. Anyway, she sent me a really nice personal rejection note, which I felt, oh, wow, I've almost made it. So then I went to work for TSR and, kind of changed my life.
Right. Some of those personal rejections are are like gold.
Yes.
Not only for the writer's morale that someone actually took the time to write a personal note, but a lot of times the criticism in there is just kind of exactly what you need, and the fact that someone took the time to do that is sometimes rejections are just as important as the acceptance.
Yeah, they
letters,
really
I
are,
think.
because and Susan told me kind of what I needed to hear, which was that it had some good things about it, but it wasn't there. It wasn't ready to be a novel. And when Bantam, years later after the success of Dragonlance, when Bantam said they would be interested in publishing it, I got it out of the box, and it was awful. And I realized that Susan had been even more than kind to see anything. I actually met her years later and told her that. She was very astonished.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Before we get into your time at TSR, you talked about discovering Tolkien in college when it was kind of sweeping across the college campuses. I was not born until 1971, so I obviously missed all of that. But what was that like when, because fantasy literature was not really a thing, especially not the way it is now. Was it kind of an underground movement?
Yes.
Was it popular? Like, how did, what was the sentiment at the time, that this weird book about elves and dwarves and hobbits was, was kind of spreading around?
Well, it was definitely an underground movement, and it kind of, as I remember, it started in California. That was where we heard about it. I was in the University of Missouri in the Midwest. At that time, of course, there was the anti-war movement was very big. There were the hippies in California, and there was a lot of hitchhiking, and especially with college students, and just traveling from university to university, basically to spread the anti-war crusade. But also, they brought Lord of the Rings with them, and it was actually seen at the time as an anti-war book, which is kind of, I think, one reason it started becoming so popular, and then it just caught on.
That's really interesting, because I think we know that Tolkien at least envisioned most of the story when he was in the trenches in World War One, and so I could see that. There's definitely some subtext there about industrialization and maybe the military-industrial complex and all of that stuff, and Frodo and Sam's kind of travel log. I could see where that would resonate with kind of the hitchhiking culture. That's really interesting. I never really thought of it in that light, but I could see where that would kind of really take hold in that environment.
Yeah, it really did, and it just, I was introduced to it by a friend who had read it and told me that she thought I would like it, and I devoured it. Between that and playing bridge, it's a wonder I got out of college.
Oh man, I have a friend who said he played bridge to fund his college.
I wasn't that good.
Oh man, but you looked for other fantasy, but there just weren't that many out there. I think Tolkien kind of planted the flag for that.
Yeah, he really did. I tried to get into Anne McCafferty and just really couldn't. And then I think the other one that people were reading was The Worm or Ouroboros, and I couldn't get into that one at all. So I just, looked for other things, put it aside.
Right. So tell me about your time at TSR. How did that come about? And this in the early days there, this was kind of another kind of underground subculture that kind of came about, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When you went there, what was the environment like?
Well, I went there, and I was there I think I arrived in '83. And it was very serendipitous. I read an article. I was working at that time as an editor for a small publishing company in Independence. And I read an article in Publishers Weekly about this game, Dungeons and Dragons, that was a phenomenon in this company, TSR, that had started as, just publishing games around Gary's kitchen table and had now become a Fortune 500 company in like 5 years or something. And I was intrigued. They gave a description of the game. I was really intrigued by the sound because I thought it would be such a great game to play with my kids, foster imagination. So a friend of mine came over and ran the game for us, and I loved it. My kids did too. And so then in Publishers Weekly, I saw TSR had an ad for a game designer. So I applied. And they sent me a test. They were very big on tests, so I had to take this test. And I flunked it because I knew absolutely nothing about the game. And so, of course, they said thank you, but no thank you. But my agent, Ray Piekner, lived in Milwaukee. And Jean Black, who was the book editor at TSR, knew Ray. She was looking for an editor who was also a writer. And by that time, I'd had a bunch of my kids' books published. And so she went to Ray and asked if he knew anybody. And he said, well, I have this client, Margaret Weiss. So she got in touch with me and asked if I'd like to come up for an interview. And I did, and she hired me that day. She did say, I'll never forget this, she took me out to lunch, and she did say, now this company isn't really all that stable. There have been some, financial problems and things, but, we're still doing well. And I just jumped at the chance. I mean, they say that, you make your own luck, but I think a lot of times luck is knowing kind of where you need to be. And she told me a little bit about this new project they had called Dragonlance. And one of my jobs was going to be becoming the book editor of Dragonlance. And I immediately thought this, and I knew nothing about the story, anything else. I hadn't met Tracy. I just thought this sounds really amazing. And so I took the job and moved my Wisconsin and, went from there.
I'm always amazed by, like you were talking about luck and, everybody's story has these great twists and turns that no one ever could have predicted. And you can call it luck or serendipity or whatever term you want to use for it. But two things always kind of turn up is that writers that are successful work really hard and they put in a lot of time, before they ever, see commercial success or whatever. And people interpret that as overnight success when the reality is there's lots and lots and lots of time, that goes unnoticed. That's paying dues and honing your craft and all of that. And then the other thing is that people, sometimes luck does play in, and some of that is just learning when to say yes, to the right things and things that may not even seem like good ideas at the time. Like, you went to work for this, kind of unstable company, that turned out to be a really, really great decision for you, I think.
Yeah, it did. And just, meeting the people, I made friends there that have been my friends, for the rest of my life. It was an amazing experience.
Yeah. Was Gary still at TSR when you went there?
No, at that time, Kevin Bloom, the Bloom brothers had taken over the company. And Kevin was CEO. Gary was out on the West Coast, I think he was supposed to be making the D&D movie deals and stuff like that. So he was out on the West Coast, and the company was being run by the Blooms.
Gotcha. TSR was this really odd company to they made tabletop games, these pen and paper role playing games. What an odd organization to then start writing and publishing their own novels. How did that whole kind of publishing arm come about from this little company?
Well, that was Rose Estes. She was the author of the Endless Quest books. Rose was, I think, number 13 higher by the company. She basically answered the phone while she was there, but she had, and then, let's see. Okay, so at this point in her life, Rose was doing a book or articles on the circus, and she joined a circus to kind of get the inside scoop on them. And she was in a laundromat one day. She left TSR, was in a laundromat one day, and came across these Choose Your Own Adventure novels. And she read one and thought immediately this would be a great thing to work with Dungeons and Dragons. So she packed up the kids, left the circus, and went back to TSR and presented the idea to the company. And she tells the story that it was shelved. They kind of sat on it, and she kept going back every once in a while and picking it. She went back to work for the company, picked it up, and showed it and to some of the management, and they were going, yeah, right. And then one day someone asked what new ideas that they had for games or product, and someone just said, well, there's these Endless Quest books. And they said, wow, that's a really cool idea. And so they hired Rose to write the first 4, I believe, and publish those. And they hit the Times list and stayed. And then she wrote 2, and they were huge. So by that time, make money doing books. And so Jean Black was as head of the book department, and that's when she decided continuing this the Endless Quest line, but they would expand outward, and she envisioned adult novels to go with the new Dragonlance project.
Wow. So you came on as editor for what would be the Dragonlance line, is that right?
Yeah, I was book editor. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How did you become part of the creative team from editor?
Well, as the book editor, because the novels were supposed to present the story, the novelized story of what was going on in the adventure modules. And this was the first time that TSR had ever published adventure novels that had kind of an overarching storyline. And this was Tracy's idea. Laura Hickman actually came up with the idea of incorporating game or story into game product. Before that, like Tracy said, a module would come out and it'd be find the dragon, kill the dragon, steal the treasure, and the next month you'd find the dragon, kill the dragon, steal the treasure. And when Laura and Tracy published their own D&D modules with complete lack of regard for copyright laws, they added a story to their modules, and they were very successful. And that's why TSR eventually hired Tracy. They told him they could either hire him or sue him for copyright infringement, and they'd much rather hire him. So he and Laura came up with the idea for Dragonlance, for a world where people rode dragons, and they actually came up with the first 3 characters, Tanis, Lorana, and Kitiara. And then Tracy presented that idea to the company, and they decided it would be a series of 12 modules. And so I was in charge of boiling this huge storyline down to novel size, and they were going to hire some high-powered author, fantasy author, to write it. But like Tracy said, they weren't going to allow him to keep the rights to the characters, and they were going to reward him for that by not paying him anything. So fantasy writers were hanging up in droves. So I sat in from the time I came on in 83, I joined the Dragonlance team and sat in on the meetings. And like I always said, Tracy told me a story, and I fell in love.
Wow. So this was early 80s, 83, I think you said. And since your time when you discovered Lord of the Rings in the mid to late 60s, when you looked for other fantasy and really couldn't find any that resonated with you, what happened to fantasy between the late 60s and the early 80s? Had it really blossomed? Were there more authors and more stories out there that were trying to fill that niche?
Yes, of course, Shannara came out in that time, and Anne McCafferty's
Right.
books were very successful. Andrea Norton, of course, that Anne McCafferty would bristle if you said anything about her writing fantasy. To her, she wrote science fiction, as she was always quick to tell you. Andrea Norton actually wrote a book for TSR, or a book about Dungeons and Dragons, although it wasn't very well received. I can't even remember the name. I think I did read that. So fantasy was getting to be very popular. It was a very popular genre, although it was still looked upon as, like, science fiction writers and readers kind of still look down their nose at it. So.
When you guys, you said that Tracy kind of told you the story and pitched this idea to you. What was your writing process like? I know that you teamed with Tracy Hickman for a very long time on many projects. What was your creative process like with the two of you, and how did two people with very different kind of visions and things, how do you coalesce those things into this wildly popular series that you guys did for so long?
Well, once they decided that Tracy and I should write the books, which they had hired another author and then ended up firing him because they didn't like what he was doing. And Tracy and I took one weekend and we wrote the first 5 chapters in the prologue. I've never done that since. But we were so into this. We knew we should be the ones to write these books because we had the vision of what we wanted to do. And Tracy was the game designer, so he was in charge of that huge project. I was the writer. We both were doing this on our own time because I was involved in other projects. And so we gave our chapters to Jean Black, who told me years later that she really only read them so she wouldn't hurt our feelings. But she took him into her office and she read him, and Tracy and I sat in my little cubicle, and Jean came back and she said, wow, she said, this is what we're looking for. So they fired the other author. He got to keep the advance because they were afraid he was going to sue. And so we had, I think, 3 months to write those books because we had to meet his deadline. And he'd already used up 3 months. So again, I wrote at night, and like I said, Tracy didn't have time. He was with the game, so I would write the books, and I was the writer anyway. Tracy knew writing game product, so I wrote and at night and on the weekends, and I'd give Tracy what I'd written, and he'd read it over and make notes, and then we would rewrite, and I turned it into Jean, who was editing, and that's how we established our working relationship.
Wow. You were involved in this with this company that was making tabletop games, and the games had a rabid following from the very beginning. How did the crossover between the games and the novels? How did they go over with the gaming population? Did people see the novels as extensions of the games? Were they something completely different, or was this something that kind of scratched the itch for gamers between gaming sessions? What kind of feedback were you getting from the gaming community?
I had written a short story about Raceland and Karaman when I was first introduced to Raceland, which was through Larry Elmore's painting of him and Karaman. My job at the beginning was I had all these characters, and I knew their stats, and I knew what they looked like because Larry and the artist had done these fantastic paintings, but I didn't know their background. that was my job to come up with that. So I knew Raceland had golden skin and hourglass eyes, and then he was called the Sly One, and then he had this twin brother who was perfectly normal looking. So I asked Larry, I said, okay, why does Raceland have golden skin and hourglass eyes? And Larry said, because it would look cool. So I had to come up with a reason, and that led me to understanding Raceland and Krammes and this codependent relationship they had, and Raceland just became a very real character to me. And so I wrote, they wanted a short story that publicized the novel, so I wrote The Test of the Twins that appeared in Dragon magazine, and which was the first Dragonlance story to go out on the market. And the story generated more mail than Dragon had ever received about a short story. So we knew that the gaming population was interested in this and kind of looking forward to it. But then our distributor at the time was Random House. And Random House told management that nobody would ever read this novel because who had ever heard of Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman? We were completely unknown. And so management came back, and this was supposed to have been a trilogy, but they came back and said, we don't think this is going to sell, so we're only going to put out one book, and you have to put an ending on it. It can't be a trilogy, so that's why it ends with the wedding of Riverwind and Goldmoon. At about that time, the company was going through more financial upheavals. Gary came back. The Blooms were gone. At one point, a lawyer had taken over the company. I don't remember why. In the middle of all this, they fired the marketing department. And so Tracy and I not only wrote our book, but we were left to promote it, which is why we ended up doing a reader's theater at Gen Con, talking about the reading portions of the book. And people loved it. And they said, oh, we really like this. So the book got published. And it got cut massively because they said it could only be 224 pages long because they wanted a $2.95 price point. So we went through and we cut huge sections of it. And in fact, I'd love to someday go back in and do a revised version and put in everything that got cut. But anyway, the book came out. And it went out to the game stores first because novels went to the hobby, and the other books went to Random House to the distributor, and they were supposed to send them out to the bookstores. So it went to the hobby, and, in those hobby stores, they didn't carry novels. They didn't know what to do with it. They ordered maybe one or two and maybe stood them in front of the cash register, or put them with the game modules. But the gamers bought it, and we started, and they'd pass it around to their friends. And then people started looking for the books in the bookstores, and they couldn't find it. So we were getting calls and letters at TSR saying, where is this book? So I called a bookstore owner in Kansas City and pretended to be a customer, and asked for the Dragons of Autumn Twilight book. And the buyer said, she said, I wish I knew where to get that. I'm getting calls for that, and I don't know where. I don't know who publishes it. I don't know anything about it, but people want to read it. So I went and told Jean, and Jean said, okay, call the fantasy buyer at Barnes & Noble and offer to send him a book. Find out his name and address, and we'll send him a book. So I did. And I called Barnes & Noble and got the switchboard, and I said, I need the name and address for your fantasy buyer. And the next moment, they're putting me through, and I hear this guy answer the phone and says his so-and-so. And I panicked. I thought, I cannot promote my own book. This just, so I made up a name, and I said I worked for TSR, and we had this book, Dragons of Autumn Twilight. And he said, oh my gosh, he said, I just got a call from a store owner in Kansas City looking for that book. And I said, wow, what a coincidence. So as it turned out, Random House had not even bothered to tell the bookstore buyers about the book because they thought it would be, worthless. And so they called Random House, and they said, oh, yeah, we made a mistake. And the book went out to the bookstores, and that was in the fall. And in December, I think it had hit the Times list.
Boy, I bet that really got Random House's attention.
It did.
Oh man, so you hear stories like that, and you wonder why kind of indie publishing has really taken off and has made such a splash in the last few years, because sometimes the big publishers just kind of cut their noses off just to spite their face. It's amazing that things have gotten done through the years, but I love your story of how you made your own serendipity there. Oh, that's fantastic. When these obviously that got Random House's attention, and they started printing books and helping distribute and market, I'm assuming, after that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As the novel started coming out, and you guys really started making a name for yourselves in the genre and in the space there, did you get any feedback from other any other quadrants of fantasy writing and publishing? Did the other factions kind of accept you guys, or was there any kind of animosity there that this little company of game designers were now publishing these fantasy novels that became so popular?
I mean, nobody had ever published novels based on a game before, so
right.
We were kind of lumped into the Star Wars, writers who write Star Wars novelizations. That was always kind of looked down upon.
Kind of the work for hire guys.
Kind of things,
Yeah.
And I remember we got a review from a British reviewer who said Dragonlance was too American to be true fantasy, high fantasy. You should be British.
What does that even mean?
Well, I guess it was because the only thing I can think of was because our heroes were kind of working class, middle class people. They had jobs, right. They worked, and they got, caught up in this, kind of war, this amazing situation. That was the
God
only
forbid.
thing I can think of. But I thought that was funny. And Gene Black, I mean, we had talked about when we first started writing that, whether we should write a kind of make it a high fantasy style. And Jean said, no. She said, I really think these books need to be accessible to a wide group of people. Kids on up, and so we tried to make our writing accessible, tried to have people talk like they would among their just everyday friends. So that was kind of a conscious decision on that part.
And it obviously paid off. I think to say that you guys connected with an audience on a deep level is an understatement. I have some friends, Kevin Summers and Chris Bohr specifically, who are writers, and I connect with them on Facebook and stuff often, and I know that they have collected just about the whole series and passed them down to their kids. There's something about these novels that they're timeless, and they really hold up well, and like you said, they're accessible. You can find a young fantasy reader and hand them these books, and you can see the fire that's lit when they read these. So you guys did an amazing job with that.
Thanks. We had fun.
So your time at TSR came to an end. What happened there, and what did you decide to go do when you left TSR?
Well, that was during Lorraine Williams came in. Gary was suddenly out. I was still working as a book editor, but I really didn't like working under Lorraine. And Tracy and I, by this time, Tracy always said the second hardest thing to do would be to start Dragonlance, and the hardest thing to do would be to stop it. And that turned out to be true. Tracy and I wrote Chronicles and Legends, and we wanted to move on. We had an idea for a new series that became the DARKSWORD novels, and TSR just wanted to do more and more Dragonlance because it was still very, very popular. So Tracy and I took DARKSWORD to my agent, who didn't know any fantasy editors in New York, but he knew the Western editor at Bantam. So he sent the proposal for DARKSWORD to the Western editor, who walked it over to the fantasy editor, who immediately, who recognized our names and said, wow, yeah, definitely, we want to buy this. And so Tracy and I were able at that point to, quit our jobs and strike out on our own, which was very scary because I still had 2 kids to support. But, we did it. And, but I still had tons of friends at TSR. We both did. And then she went back when when Pat McGilligan was editor, and Brian Thompson and Mary Kirchhoff, and went back and did more Dragonlance. But that's kind of how we struck out on our own.
Yeah. Dragonlance has to be the longest running book series in print. I would think it's enormous at this point. Do you ever feel I can imagine when something is that successful that maybe the weight of it is a little daunting, like, man, I've created this thing and I may never get out from under it because I've got other things I want to do in life, but this thing is too successful. Did you ever feel like that?
No, I never did. DARKSWORD was successful in its own right, and we did Rose of the Prophet, which kind of got caught up in world events because it was about Arabs, and then we did the DEATHGATE series, and that became almost as successful as Dragonlance. That one really, really people really liked that. That also hit the New York Times list, and so but Dragonlance it's your first love. It's your first novel. It's your first love. It'll always be your first love, at least for me.
Yeah, for sure. So when you branched out and you said you and Tracy pitched the DARKSWORD trilogy, you guys were you were names in publishing at that time. That was a very different experience than when Random House said we're not going to promote this book because nobody knows them.
Right. Yeah, that was very different.
Oh man, that had to be a great feeling. Are you and Tracy still writing together?
No, I'm writing with another author, Robert Krammes. Tracy is involved in an amazing project called thevoid.com. So if everybody wants to Google thevoid.com, all one word, they can see it's what do they call it? The name escapes me. Where you kind of go, put on goggles and go into this other world.
Virtual
reality. Yeah, it's a company that's doing virtual reality, and they have taken it beyond, putting on goggles. I mean, and it's a whole thing. I mean, they've had Harrison Ford do this, and they're opening. They had a Ghostbusters virtual reality and Madame Tussauds in New York, and they're opening a new facility in Toronto. So Tracy's son was one of the founders of this company, and he's now working full time with them. Oh, and wow. I think he's doing some writing with his wife, Laura.
That's great to hear. I'll put a link to thevoid.com in the show notes, and we'll all go check it out. You own your own publishing company now. I think I read that you have 2 publishing companies. How did that come about, and what sort of things are you doing?
Well, I had a game publishing company, Margaret Weiss Productions, but I just recently retired from that. So we did the Firefly game, the Supernatural game, Serenity, Marvel. We did all sorts of game products based on the Cortex system. And so I have retired from that. I went out on, our last products were Firefly, and where can you go after that? It was just simply amazing. So I've retired, and I'm just concentrating on my novels and doing flyball racing with my dogs. That's my hobby.
I was going to ask you about the dogs, and what is that you guys do?
Flyball racing. You can Google this too. It's like a relay race for dogs. You have a 50-foot long lane with 4 jumps, or 15 feet apart. And at the end of the lane is a spring-loaded box with a tennis ball in it. And the first dog on the team runs over the jumps, hits the box, catches the tennis ball, runs back over the jumps. Second dog goes down, 4 dogs on a team, and you're racing against another team of dogs for best time, and clean run.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Lots of barking.
Oh yeah, and your team is the Barbarians?
Yes. Uh-huh.
That's so cool. That is so cool. I'll see if I can find a video and put in the show notes to see what that's about. That's so cool. You talked about your game publishing company. Is gaming something that has stayed with you all these years?
Oh yeah. I mean, every year I go to Gen Con, the big gaming convention. This will be my 33rd or 34th year at Gen Con. It's their 50th anniversary. And so I love playing games. I also go to GaryCon every year, which is a little convention in honor of Gary Gygax. And my friends and I get together and we play games. And I've always loved it.
Something that fascinates me, because I grew up in this time, in the kind of, I guess it was really about the mid 80s, is when it kind of reached a fever pitch. D&D was wildly popular, and the tie-in books were really getting popular and kind of taking over things. And then there's all of this talk and kind of backlash against D&D and that whole kind of subculture started coming up from people that thought it was evil and that bad things were going to happen to kids from playing these games and stuff like that. As someone who was in the industry and was publishing the books, did you guys feel any of that backlash there, or was this just kind of out on the fringes and didn't really reach you guys?
No, we felt it. There was this religious tract called Dark Dungeons. You can go online and find it, and
I remember it.
Yeah, they would actually go into bookstores and put that in the books. In like the Dragonlance books,
guerrilla marketing.
They put this religious tract in there. And at one point, I think it was CBS, they did a whole show on that. And
yes.
I think they came out and they toured the company. We had to take all our weird stuff down off our cubicles, and we had to look very staid and businesslike, and you'd walk into the art room, and the artist had Larry Elmore, Keith Parkinson, Clyde Caldwell, and Jeff Easley had these amazing paintings all over the wall. All those had to come down. So we were definitely a part of it. It was just weird. I mean, people that thought that, when you played Dungeons and Dragons, you were casting spells, and you could really it would give you the power to summon demons, and all this. And it was like, if this was true, would we really be working here? Right. Wouldn't we be out on our yacht somewhere in the Caribbean? But anyhow, it was strange. It's kind of calmed down, but occasionally it resurfaces every once in a while. I remember this was back in the days when we got mail, actual letters, and
right.
I remember one letter I got that came to me that said, "Dear Miss Weiss, would you please send me one of the Dragonlance books? I want to read it, but Sister Mary Elizabeth says if I do, I'll go straight to hell."
Well, I think you should feel honored that you wrote something that was worth the punishment. You know? Oh my goodness! That's amazing. So since then, you published a series of books with your daughter a few years ago, didn't you?
Yeah, we did 2 romance novels.
Oh, that's awesome! How did that come about?
We just had wanted to do, a romance novel, and my agent thought we should try to pitch the idea, so we did, and we ended up writing 2 paranormal romances about male angels who come to Earth and the women who fall in love with them. It was really, we had a good time. I wrote.
So you did kind of a Nephilim kind of thing.
I wrote the novel, the basic part of the novel, and my daughter wrote all the salacious sex scenes. So we
that had to be comfortable.
But we ended up not writing any more after those 2 because the restrictions they put on you when you write romance novels, your hero has to do this and your heroine has to do that and she has to wear this and she can't do that, which is something you do not get in fantasy writing. You're allowed free reign to your creativity, and so we just decided it was more of a hassle than it was worth.
Speaking of fantasy and the kind of wide open worlds that you have, for writers that want to get into fantasy, it seems like we take the same kind of basket full of tropes, and fantasy writers just amaze me because you take kind of a a box of toys, and everybody's box is similar. I'm not saying that they're the same, but a lot of great fantasy, a lot of the set pieces are very similar. Yet we come up with these great stories that resonate with people and that tell a brand new story every time. And I think people on the outside look and say, "Oh, you've just got wizards and dragons, and how can you do something different with those things that have been done over and over and over again?" So, as a writer who's written so much in the genre, how do you continue to come up with new ideas and new ways of telling familiar stories?
Well, that's the real challenge. Tracy always says, as far as, people are always asking us where we come up with our ideas, and Tracy always says, well, there's this warehouse in Detroit. But and that's kind of how you feel sometimes, that you just go back to the warehouse in Detroit and look for ideas. And I think for me, I can always come up with ideas for stories. That's never a problem. But the challenge for me became, how do I make my dragons different? How do I make dragons in each world different from another? I mean, it's a real temptation to want to do chromatic dragons like TSR, or, all red dragons breathe fire and all gold dragons are good, And so that's been a challenge, and I really work when I come up with different worlds to try to make the dragons different and interesting as characters in their own right.
Nice. Your newest book is SPYMASTER, which is the first in a new series called Dragon Corsairs. What is this new series, and what can you tell us about it?
Well, it's set in the world of the Dragon Brigade, which was the series that preceded that, but this is a totally new series with some of the same characters, introducing new characters. And it's a swashbuckling book. One of my favorites as a child was The Three Musketeers, and this is not exactly the same time period as The Three Musketeers, but there's gunpowder and pistols and cannons. Ships. This is a world where islands float in the sky, and continents. A few continents are anchored to the ground, but some float. And people travel this world on ships that fly through the air. And it's so everybody is always mistaking it for steampunk, but it is not steampunk. It's swashbuckling. It's fun. Our heroine is a pirate. Our hero is kind of an anti-hero who is the spymaster, and our other hero is a prince who may not be a pretender to the throne, and it's a lot of fun. We've had a lot of fun with it. Lots of court intrigue and spies and dragons.
It sounds like a lot of fun. The book is called SPYMASTER, Book 1 of the Dragon Corsairs series. I'll be sure to link it up in the show notes. Margaret, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'm really happy that you joined me for the 200th episode, and I can't thank you enough for what you've done for the genre and what you've done for me. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. It's like I say, it's been lots of fun.
Where can people find you if they want to stay up to date? Because you're still publishing. You've got lots going on. If God forbid someone's not familiar with your work and wants to dig into your back catalog, do you have a website where they can connect with you?
Yes, it's Margaret Weiss, all one word, MargaretWeis.com. And I'm also on Facebook.
Excellent.
You can hear all about my fly ball racing.
We're definitely gonna look it up, I promise. Margaret, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you very much.
Stay tuned now for a clip from the Jason Crane series by Richard Glebes. There's a link to the entire series in the show notes. As always, tune in every Tuesday and Friday for new episodes of the Author Stories podcast. Find all of the archives at hankgarner.com. Now on to our clip from the Jason Crane series by Richard Glebes.
How do we know when we are watched? Do the eyes of a predator reflect moonlight, focusing it on our skin? Do we feel two little spots of white on our neck and bristle with fear? I knew I was watched, and I could feel its quality. A man's gaze, like yearning eyes in a smoky tavern. I felt drawn to it. I skirted the pond, and beneath a vine-choked bower, I found the horseman's severed head. The braid at the back had snagged on some twig, turning the dead eyes upward. A dragonfly rode his cheek. It fled as I reached for him. I took hold of his braid, like the vine of a pumpkin, and drew him from the water. We sat together on a mossy log, he and I. Oh, I felt such joy to look upon his face again. I wiped the mud from his lips and nostrils, preparing him to be buried. The Domine could not watch the graveyard always, I decided. I would wait for night to fall, steal a shovel, and do the work myself. A trio of colonial soldiers were raising a redoubt nearby. Thomas the gravedigger brought them his own long-handled shovels. He stood and watched the soldiers work with professional interest, as dirt was his trade. Autumn leaves snagged in his hair, but he was too busy tale-telling to notice. The morning's dark business had quite bewitched his imagination. But the big one was a Hessian. One of them horsemen, head lopped off by a cannonball. He'll be a-haunting this place now, he will, with a hip-hip and a clippity-clop. I'll be seeing headless spooks in my burying ground. Just you wait. And if he can't find his own head, he'll be wanting one of ours. Lord love us. He shivered, hands in pockets. The soldiers laughed at him, but the boy was serious. Our legend had begun to spin itself already, from the lips of our tow-headed gravedigger. Fact and fiction going their separate ways, severed, as they often are. I listened with fascination. I had always loved a ghost story, and I'd never witnessed the birth of one before. Ghost stories are a form of history. If we say, 3 men died building that church and they forever haunt it, we keep those souls alive in death. Ghost stories are the past bleeding into the present, demanding acknowledgement of those unseen presences all around us, in our street names and genealogies and on our crumbling headstones. The tragedy of Old Willow, the fall of the horseman, the fate of you or I. These tales are forgotten by academic historians, who chronicle only great men. But our small lives are remembered, so long as our ghost stories are told. That is why we must tell them and retell them, and keep them kindled in the hearts of our children.